friends, this is Christopher Davis-Shannon, and this week I'm taking a little bit of a step back from my usual advanced and intermediate uke lessons to go back to the very beginning and talk about the foundation of playing, and that is really the mechanics of the instrument itself, or how our body addresses playing this instrument. I've had a lot of new students recently who come to me mostly because they know a lot of chord voicings, they know a lot of more advanced techniques, but have plateaued in their playing, and I've found that a common theme is that when they started playing, they never really addressed just the mechanics of playing an instrument. They jumped right into what chords should I be playing, what strumming pattern will I use for this song. But we need to actually learn to address the instrument itself as a tool, and thus how to use that tool effectively with our body. So I hope that this lesson helps not just beginners, but maybe some more intermediate players who haven't really thought about these parts of playing an instrument. The thing with mechanics is that the human body has natural positions that we like to be in, and instruments tend to put us in quite unnatural positions. It's not many times in life that our fingers need to do something like this. So we need to find the best way to address that so the mechanics of our body work with playing the instrument without too much undue strain. So the first thing that we need to speak about here is how to properly hold the instrument. Now, I will note right up front that there are many proper ways to hold the uke. There is not one singular way that is correct, but you need to try different ways to find out what's most comfortable for you. With a soprano uke like I have, the smaller kind like this, many times we will just hold the instrument. This is sort of the classic way of playing. You'll cradle it and push it against your body like this. You can see as I hold it like this, my neck's not dropping down. And the reason for this is we support the body, not the headstock. If we're supporting the headstock, we're putting strain on our wrist here as it's pushing down like this. We're constantly pushing up the instrument, and then we're not going to have the finger dexterity that we need to really move around the fingerboard if we're also just trying to hold this in place. So bring the uke against your body like this, and just bring your right arm around to cradle it, and you should be able to have it stay up just like this. Now, if you're playing a larger instrument, you'll find with concerts and tenors, many times we won't hold them in the hand like this. If you are sitting down with your instrument, you can put it in your lap. It'll sit right on your thigh, but again, up against your body. We don't want it out here. I see many people transitioning over from guitar that put it flat like this, which causes us to lean over the instrument and put our wrist in a very, very unnatural position as we play. So we want to have, if you think of a classical guitar style of playing, we want the neck up at nearly a 45-degree angle here. And that's going to put us in a more upright position so we're not constantly hunched over the instrument. And that's also keeping our arms in a better position to freely move about. Again, the same thing goes as for when we're holding the instrument, is to make sure that the body here is nicely balanced so that our left arm is not constantly fighting to keep the headstock up. You'll find on many ukes, especially with geared tuners or guitar style tuners on here, that the headstocks are quite a bit heavier, and this might seem almost impossible just because of the balance of the uke when you're holding it, that you're always fighting it to stay up. And that's when I really recommend using a strap, which I do not use on my own because this is a very well balanced instrument and quite tiny. I generally handhold this. But with larger instruments with heavier headstocks, having a strap, even playing while seated, will help keep the instrument in a proper position. So if you're struggling really to hold it in a position that does not stress out your body and doesn't allow you to sit up straight or stand up straight while you're playing, if you're constantly hunched over the instrument or you feel that you don't have freedom of movement with your hands, you're constantly fighting the instrument from moving, a strap is highly recommended. And again, you'll have to find the exact way that works with your body as to what is appropriate for you to hold it, but you want to make sure that it's comfortable and natural. We should not be fighting the instrument the entire time. So moving on from here, let's talk about left hand position and more specifically left arm position, which we don't think very much about. We think about where our hand should be. So as we put our fingers on the fingerboard, regardless of how we're holding the uke, this will remain true. Our thumb will be on the back of the neck, and it'll be more or less behind where your second finger would be on the fingerboard like this. Now the key to this is we're not gripping down with our thumb. Your thumb, as we go up and down the fingerboard, should remain smoothly on the back. Your thumb is acting as a guide Your fingers are not a clamp clamping down the strings. Your finger is just, your thumb is just a little bit of extra support to guide your hand up and down the fingerboard. And with that, we need to note that your fingers themselves are not what's pressing down the strings. If you feel that you are really just pressing down with your fingers, we're not doing this correctly, and you'll find that you'll have a tough time moving up and down the fingerboard. So you're pressing down with your fingers, you're pressing heavily against your thumb, and you're creating friction on the back of the neck, so you won't be able to move freely. This is a common misconception in a lot of fretted instruments when we are playing. This goes back even with violin and cello and upright bass. We play with this same sort of technique that the fingers, while they are what is pressing down the strings, the strength to press down the strings is actually coming from the weight of our arm. You can see that my arm is close against the body. It's not out here. This puts my wrist in a very straight and relaxed position. We don't want any stress in the wrist whatsoever. And if I turn to the side, you see when I'm playing, my wrist is not out here. As I bring my elbow back, we're not adjusting the wrist position. We want to think about where the elbow is as we play to keep that wrist in a nice, relaxed position. And then as I play a chord, you can see my thumb, I could take it off the back right here. I don't need it because I'm not using pressure from my thumb to press things down. The weight of my arm is pulling the strings back, and thus the uke against me as well, keeping it from moving from position. You want to really practice this using arm weight to bring it back. The muscles are coming from here, and the weight of your arm is what's pressing down the strings, not your fingers. If you feel as though you are only using your fingers, we only have these small tendons they're using here. These are not big muscles. And we do move our fingers about, of course, but actually pressing down the strings is coming from the arm weight. And it's important to check yourself while you're playing. And one thing that I always tell my beginner students is one of the most beneficial things that you can do in the practice room is to practice in front of a mirror. Many of these mechanical things we are unable to see properly from over top of the instrument. It's just the wrong perspective. And this is why it's nice to have a teacher as well, someone to correct your technique who can see it from a different perspective. But if you don't have that, practicing in front of a mirror will help you see the stresses that you are causing on your body. You want to make sure that you're nice and straight, that your arm is natural, that your wrist is straight like this, that your elbow is not splayed out or back too much. Everything should be very natural and align as your body naturally does. It is odd enough, some of the motions that we have to make on this instrument. We don't want to make it harder for ourselves as we play. So moving on to the right hand, the most common problem that I see with strumming, and this is across the board with so many players, is that the strumming is too much. On uke, we're using these nylon or fluorocarbon strings on here. They're very lightweight, and it's a very small instrument. Because of that, we have a rather small dynamic window. And what do I mean by that? It means that the amount of softness and loudness that we can get from the instrument is not as big as, say, a guitar or a much larger instrument, because it's a small vibrating body. So we get to a point where if we strum too hard, it just sounds bad. And ultimately, the first thing that people do when they hear you play an instrument, they hear the sound. They're not worried about your fancy chords or these strumming patterns or anything like that. A listener is listening for the sound of the instrument. We need to focus on bringing a sweet sound out of the instrument. So with uke, we need to be wary of strumming too hard. And one of the biggest problems I see, especially people that use a strap or sit or don't hold their uke, because holding your uke can inhibit this problem, is that if I put it in my lap like this, a lot of people will strum with their elbow, with their whole arm. But if you think back to the classic playing position, holding, we're unable to do that. Everything comes from the wrist in uke. And that's what's really important here. We have a very small plane of travel. We only have about 1.5 inches across the strings. We don't need to move any further than that. There are no strings out here. There are no strings up here. We need to stay right here the entire time. And again, practicing in front of a mirror can help you see that you're making too exaggerated of motions. And this is a huge problem when you start getting to more up-tempo tunes, because your hand's not able to get back where it needs to be as fast. So check yourself and make sure that as you strum, when you start out, put your arm down by your side and let your hand relax. And as you bring your hand up like this, keep the wrist flexible. We want to pretend like we're painting a fence the whole time. This is our general motion. It's loose and relaxed. We don't want any tension in the hands. And you can sit there on your instrument just practicing a basic down and up stroke. This is the fundamental for most strumming patterns. It's down and up in different variations. But we want a nice fluid movement as we do this. Check yourself and make sure that you're not coming from the elbow, but coming from the wrist. And with that, you want to practice listening to the sound coming out of your instrument. Find where the sweet spot is on your instrument. As we strum, I see a lot of people strumming back here, which puts your arm in this very odd position. If we play right where the body meets the fingerboard, right about the 12th fret on most standard size ukes, that's where our basic sweet spot is for play. And I'm strumming very light. My first finger is just gracing over the strings. We don't need to fight to pull a big sound out of this instrument. And in fact, the more we fight, the more that the sound itself is going to degrade. We want to let this be nice and soft and sweet. So I recommend when you wake up every day or when you start your practice session, sit down in front of a mirror and just critique your posture and your arm positions while you're playing, and spend maybe 5 minutes just strumming something like an open C major chord and paying close attention to how far we are strumming, how loud we are strumming, the consistency of our strumming, and that the strum is coming entirely from the wrist. We don't want any elbow in this. Nice and soft and sweet.